I am sure most of us have had the experience of being at a meeting where maybe there was a more heated discussion, or maybe having a conversation with someone, and when we walk away, or maybe as you got in your car here in the parking lot, if the meeting was in this facility, and you started to drive away, all of a sudden you got just a little bit of distance, and you received a little bit of clarity, and you all of a sudden thought of what you wanted to say. Am I the only one that has that happen? You're just having that little bit of space, and you all of a sudden recognize something that was said and something you wanted to say, and it's like, oh, I wish I would have said that. Or maybe, now this next little piece is going to be painful, or maybe you drive away after a heated discussion, and as you start to reflect with just a little bit of distance, you realize that someone else in the room was correct and you were wrong. Oh, that's rough, isn't it? I know most of you haven't had that happen. For those of us that have had it happen, and those friends that are watching online, you don't really need to email and remind me this afternoon, but if you must, that's okay. It's amazing what just a little distance can do. Just a little space that brings a little clarity to us. It helps us recognize what maybe we were missing. It's interesting that the Gospel of John was written later. We have the synoptic Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke. But John was written later, and it's almost as if John had that opportunity we're talking about. He had the opportunity to have a little bit of space and a little more clarity as to what he experienced as a disciple. So when he writes, you kind of have that sense. And our scripture passage for this morning is part of really 3 resurrection appearances. And for all 3 of these appearances, you have a sense that John was more reflective. He recognized some things maybe he needed to think about. Well, first, what's interesting about all 3 of these appearances is that basically the people that were on the scene at first did not recognize the risen Christ. The first one in John is about Mary being at the tomb, and she believes she's interacting with a gardener, but then realizes that it's Jesus, did not recognize him at first. In the passage we read this morning, we have Thomas, who was with the disciples, and even through what they were saying and their excitement, he could not recognize with these that he had been with for 3 years that, yes, Jesus had risen. And then the third appearance is when Peter decides to go fishing, and they're out in a boat, and Jesus appears on the shore, and at first they don't recognize that that's the risen Christ. So here we are, a few days, a week after Easter. You've had a little bit of time for reflection, and maybe when you pulled out of this parking lot last Sunday, at least for a little bit of time, you were thinking about the service and about Christ rising from the dead, and maybe you were carrying on that dialogue within yourself. You were saying, do I believe that? Do I accept that? Maybe some doubts creeped in, and here we are a week later. So where are you a week later with the resurrection after you've had that opportunity, just like John had that opportunity as he writes about these appearances? And there's something else about these 3 in this chapter. There's 2 other elements that all 3 of them have. And I believe this came from that time that John had, that space. See, every one of these appearances has an assurance and an action item. With Mary, the assurance comes from her searching, but Jesus actually calling her by name. He knows her. He knows her, and Jesus calls her by name and then tells her the action item, go and tell this good news. Here with the disciples and then with Thomas, Jesus is present and says, I give you the Spirit. You will never be alone. You have the empowering of the Spirit, and you have peace, shalom, a wholeness, and now I send you. So send I you to go share through this power and to share this wholeness. And then with the disciples on the shore, the assurance is the forgiveness that comes from Jesus. For those times when maybe we have driven away, walked away, and we've doubted, and we've really wondered and possibly betrayed, there is forgiveness from Jesus. But then, again, there's an action item. You need to go. You need to go and feed my sheep. See, I believe what John is sharing with us in this whole chapter is that we experience the resurrection through our actions, through putting it into action. As we put the good news into action in our lives, we realize that, yes, we've seen the risen Christ, and we realize we've seen the risen Christ when we put what we believe into action. But see, I think we get caught up in something. And it's a real challenge in an organization like a Presbyterian church. We get caught up continuing to debate and talk about it and think about one more thing maybe we should have said, or one more piece of clarity that we can bring up. And sometimes the debate is internal, but sometimes it's around a room. We get together every month and we talk about it some more. And talking about it, debating it it's not getting to the action point. See, with the resurrection, it's when you get to the action point, what John realized is that it becomes a reality for you. And you recognize that the risen Christ is truly in your presence. In just a little while, we are going to be ordaining and installing some of our officers. And this is really a call for all of us. Listen closely to the liturgies we use, the things that we will say together, the questions that are asked, because they show what we are talking about. It's about how we serve. It's how we put it into action. And that truly is where Christ stays alive for all of us. And as we go, we are sent with this good news of wholeness. Christ is risen.